Long before the concept of history began, before the first tick of a clock or the first beat of a heart, there was a reality that possessed no shape, no boundary, and no name. There was no horizon to mark the distance between here and there, for distance itself had not yet been conceived. There was no mechanism to count the passing of moments, for time stood still in a suspended, breathless, eternal present. There was only the vast, silent theater of the unformed. In this primal state, the universe was not a vacuum of empty space as we know it now. It was not merely nothing. It was a heavy, fluid chaos. The ancient text describes it as tohu wabohu, formless and void. Imagine, if you can, an ocean without a shore, a depth without a bottom, a massive, rolling expanse of raw existence that had no purpose, no order, and no light. It was a darkness so absolute that it was not merely the absence of light, but a physical weight, a thick, impenetrable blanket that wrapped the cosmos in a slumber that had lasted for eons. It was a silence so profound that even the concept of sound felt impossible. This was the deep, the abyss, a churning, silent majesty of water and shadow. There was no sound of crashing waves, for there was no air to carry the vibration, nor any beach for the waves to break against. There was only the mute, shifting pressure of the deep, waiting in the stillness. It was a coldness that went beyond temperature, a coldness of non-existence, where molecules had no reason to move, no energy to expend. The cosmos was a sleeper, heavy with potential but paralyzed by the dark. And yet, this void was not empty of presence. Hovering over the face of these dark, silent waters was a force of infinite potential, the Spirit of God, Ruach Elohim. Like a great bird gliding over a nesting place, the Spirit moved with a gentle, terrifying power over the surface of the chaos. There was no frantic energy, no haste in this movement, only the deliberate, brooding presence of the Almighty, surveying the canvas of the deep. The Spirit moved, and the chaos seemed to hush in anticipation. The raw materials of reality trembled beneath this inspection. The potential for everything, for granite mountains, for rushing rivers, for the delicate wing of a moth and the burning heart of a star, was held there, suspended in the mind of the architect, waiting for the first spoken word to grant them permission to exist. Then the silence was finally irrevocably broken, not by a roar of effort, but by a calm command that shattered the philosophical weight of non-existence. Let there be light. It did not happen with a violent explosion, but with a majestic, unfolding bloom. In the midst of the suffocating dark, a photon came into being. Then another, then a cascade. A soft, pearlescent glow began to permeate the heavy waters. It was not the searing, focused light of a sun, for the sun did not yet exist. This was a primordial, pure illumination, a diffuse glory that emanated from the command itself. It revealed the textures of the deep for the first time, turning the black waters into shifting sheets of silver and gray. The light pulsed, separating itself from the shadows. It was the first act of ordering the universe, the distinction between the seen and the unseen. God looked at the light and saw that it was good. He carved out the first distinction in the universe, day and night. The first evening settled, a heavy purple hush, followed by the first morning, a golden promise of beginnings. The first day was written into the record of time. The architect continued his work, moving with the slow, deliberate patience of one who has eternity at his disposal. He looked upon the heavy, suffocating waters that filled the cosmos and spoke again. He commanded an expanse, a firmament. Picture the surface of the global ocean beginning to stretch. A separation occurred, vast and atmospheric. The waters below remained heavy and liquid, anchored by gravity, but the waters above rose, becoming a mist, a vapor, a canopy of suspended moisture. Between them, a great, hollow chamber opened up, the sky. The air was thin, crisp, and clean, filling the gap between the ocean and the clouds. For the first time, there was a medium for sound. The sound of wind was born in this moment, a low, whistling gale that swept across the face of the newborn ocean, rippling the surface, creating the first whitecaps on the endless sea. The cycle of evaporation and rain began its eternal rhythm. Evening fell again and morning followed. A second day. Now the world was a sphere of water and sky, a blue marble swirling with clouds, but there was no place to stand. There was no stability. The architect turned his gaze to the waters below. He commanded them to gather, to retreat, to bow before a new element. Imagine the sound of that third morning. A deep subterranean groan began in the core of the world. The tectonic plates, dormant until now, began to grind. The waters, which had covered everything since the beginning of time, began to slide backward. Massive currents, miles wide, rushed toward the basins God had prepared. The ocean floor buckled and heaved, and as the water receded, something dark and solid began to breach the surface. Rock, wet, glistening, obsidian-black rock rose from the depths. Mountain ranges, dripping with the brine of the deep, pushed their peaks toward the new sky. Granite cliffs sheared upwards, shaking off the weight of the ocean. Continents shifted and locked into place with the grinding sound of a world being forged. The water crashed against these new barriers, foaming and roaring, creating the first coastlines, the first beaches, the first cliffs. The dry land appeared, craggy, barren, and brown. It was a skeleton of a world, strong and immovable, waiting to be clothed. The command came forth, "Let the earth sprout vegetation." This was not a sudden magical pop, but a rapid, miraculous growth that swept across the continents. From the sterile, wet soil, life began to push upward. Green shoots pierced the surface of the mud. It began as a carpet of moss, softening the hard edges of the jagged rock, drinking in the remnants of the ocean spray. Then, ferns unfurled their spiral heads, ancient and green, drinking in the moist air. Grasses swept across the plains like a green tide, moving faster than the wind. Then came the trees. Great oaks, cedars of Lebanon, and fruit-bearing groves pushed upward, their bark groaning as they expanded, their roots diving deep into the fresh earth to find the water tables below. Branches stretched out like arms waking from a long sleep. Leaves unfurled, catching the primordial light. For the first time, the world had a scent. The sharp, fresh smell of pine. The sweet, rotting richness of turning soil. The fragrance of blooming wildflowers. Lilies, roses, and orchids exploding in color across the meadows. The wind now had something to rustle. The silence of the rock was replaced by the whispering of a billion leaves. Seeds fell, planting the promise of the future. Evening came and morning followed. A third day. The stage was set, but it was lit only by that diffuse, sourceless glow from the first day. The architect now turned his attention to the heavens he had stretched out. He condensed the light. He gathered the brilliance and formed the governors of time. In the expanse of the sky, the sun ignited, a blinding golden sphere that brought a new kind of warmth, a radiant heat that baked the soil and caused the mists to rise, cast distinct, sharp shadows across the valleys. It became the keeper of the day, the clock of the solar system. And as the sun dipped below the new horizon, painting the sky in violent violets and burning reds, the moon appeared, a pale, silent watcher reflecting the sun's glory. It pulled at the tides, setting the rhythm of the oceans. Around it, the architect scattered the stars like dust, flinging galaxies into the far reaches of the darkness. Constellations formed Orion, the Pleiades, the Bear, hung in the velvet void to mark the seasons, the years, and the festivals of ages to come. The sky was no longer a gray ceiling. It was a cathedral of jewels, turning slowly above the silent earth. Evening came and morning followed. A fourth day. The world was beautiful, but it was still. It lacked the chaotic, joyful noise of sentient life. The architect looked at the oceans, the deep, blue waters that mirrored the sky. He spoke to the depths. Let the waters swarm. Suddenly, the silence of the sea was broken. Life erupted in the deep. Microscopic plankton swirled in the currents. Great whales breached the surface, their massive bodies crashing down with the sound of thunder, blowing mists into the air. Sharks glided silently through the dark reefs. Schools of silver fish, numbering in the millions, darted like living arrows through the currents, flashing in the filtered sunlight. The coral reefs burst into living color, and above the water, the air was suddenly filled with the sound of beating wings. Birds of every color took flight from the trees. Eagles caught the thermal drafts of the new sun, circling high above the mountains. Sparrows chirped in the bushes. Herons stalked the shallow waters with patient grace. The world was now filled with motion. The sky was alive. The ocean was teeming. The silence of the void was a distant memory, replaced by the symphony of life. Evening came and morning followed. Fifth day. Finally, the morning of the sixth day dawned. The earth was ready. The table was set. The house was built. But the land itself, the forests, the plains, the valleys, was still quiet, save for the wind. God spoke to the earth. Let the earth bring forth living creatures. From the dust and the forests they came. The ground seemed to birth them. The heavy, rhythmic thud of elephants walking through the tall grass shook the ground. The stealthy pad of the leopard's paw on the moss. The lowing of cattle in the meadows. Wild horses galloped across the plains, their manes catching the wind. Insects buzzed in the heat of the day. Bees finding the first flowers. Ants building their colonies in the fresh earth. The ecosystem began to hum, a complex, perfect machine of predator and prey, of grazer and grower. Everything was in motion. The wind carried the scent of rain and blooming jasmine. The sun warmed the backs of the lions resting on the warm rocks. The rivers flowed clear and cold from the mountains, teeming with life. This was Eden. This was the world before the scar of history marred it. It was a paradise of perfect balance, vibrating with the fresh energy of creation. Every leaf was perfect. Every stream was pure. There was no decay, no waste. But despite the noise of the birds and the majesty of the mountains, there was a sense of waiting. The throne of the world was empty. The garden was a palace without a king. The animals roamed, but there was no one to name them, no one to appreciate the order of their existence. The stars spun, but there was no one to look up and wonder at them. The creation was a masterpiece, but it lacked an observer. The architect paused. He looked at the vast, green, living masterpiece he had spun out of the darkness. It was good, but it was not yet finished. The heart of the creation was missing. The one who would bear the image of the Maker had not yet drawn breath. The dust of the ground lay undisturbed in a quiet grove, waiting for the touch that would change the universe forever. The setting was complete. The era of the void was over. The era of life had begun. The universe was now a symphony of motion and light. The galaxies spun in their silent, velvet orbits. The oceans heaved with the rhythm of the tides. The forests of the new world swayed in the wind, a sea of green canopies breathing oxygen into the crisp, clean atmosphere. But for all this grandeur, for all the complexity of the ecosystem and the majesty of the geology, there was still a silence at the center of creation. It was a silence of purpose. The cathedral had been built, but the priest had not yet entered. The palace stood ready, but the throne remained unclaimed. The narrative now shifts from the cosmic scale of galaxies and oceans to a single, quiet location. Picture a specific place in the eastern region of Eden. Here, the soil was rich, dark, and damp with the mist that rose from the earth each morning. There was a stillness here that felt different from the rest of the wild world. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of the great trees, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. It was here, in this quiet grove, that the architect descended from the vastness of the heavens to the intimacy of the dirt. For the creation of the stars he had spoken. For the separation of the seas he had commanded. But for this next act, the Almighty fell silent. He did not speak to the air or the water. He reached down. The text tells us that the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. Adama, the red earth, visualized the scene. The hand of the Creator, invisible yet infinitely tangible, disturbing the pristine soil. He gathered the dust, the finest particles of the earth, the very substance of the physical world. He mixed it with the moisture of the mist, forming clay. This was not a quick magic trick. It was the work of a master potter. He began to shape the clay. Slowly, a form emerged from the earth. A torso broad and strong, designed to house the vital organs. Limbs, articulated with joints and muscles, capable of running, climbing, and building. Hands unique in all of creation, with fingers capable of delicate precision. Fingers meant to hold, to craft, to write, and to touch. A face was sculpted, eyes closed in a sleep deeper than death. A nose, a mouth, ears shaped to catch the frequencies of the wind. There he lay, the first man, a masterpiece of biology, perfect in every detail, yet utterly lifeless. He was a statue of mud and minerals. The blood in his veins was still. The heart in his chest was quiet. The brain was a complex network of neurons waiting for a spark. He was part of the earth, indistinguishable from the ground he lay upon, save for his shape. He was a vessel waiting to be filled. Then came the moment that separated humanity from every other creature that crawled, swam, or flew. The Creator leaned close to this lifeless form. The gap between the infinite God and the finite clay closed. God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Nishmat Chayim. It was not merely oxygen that entered the man's lungs. It was spirit. It was consciousness. It was a fragment of the divine vitality. The chest of the clay figure rose for the first time. A sharp, sudden intake of air. The heart, dormant and still, gave a sudden, powerful contraction. Thump thump. The sound of the first human heartbeat echoed in the quiet grove. Blood, suddenly warm and oxygenated, rushed through the veins, flushing the skin with color. The cold clay transformed into warm, living flesh. The man's eyes snapped open. His first sight was not the ground, nor the trees, nor the animals. His first sight was the light of the day filtering through the canopy, and perhaps the sensing of the presence that hovered over him. He blinked, the lashes clearing his vision. He took another breath, deeper this time, tasting the air. It was sweet, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and damp earth. He pushed himself up. His muscles flexed, responding instantly to his will. He looked at his hands, turning them over, watching the tendons move, seeing the unique swirl of his fingerprints. He felt the texture of the soil beneath him, cool, gritty, real. He felt the warmth of the sun on his skin. He heard the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. This was Adam, the one made of earth. He stood up. He was tall, unblemished, possessing a strength and vitality that no human since has ever known. His mind was not a blank slate, but a reservoir of intuition and intelligence, ready to engage with the world. He took his first steps. He did not stumble like a child. He walked with the grace of a king taking possession of his kingdom. For the first few hours, Adam simply existed in the wonder of sensory input. The feeling of the grass bending beneath his bare feet, the rough texture of tree bark, the coolness of a stream as he cupped water in his hands and drank, the first sensation of thirst quenched, the shock of the cold liquid running down his throat. But he was not just an observer, he was a participant. God had placed him in the garden to work it and to keep it. This was his domain. As he walked, exploring the boundaries of his paradise, he began to encounter the other inhabitants of Eden. And here, the distinction of his nature became sharp and painful. God brought the animals to him. It was a procession of the wild. Out of the forest came the lions, walking with heavy, confident strides. Adam looked at them, observing their golden coats, their power, their distinct nature. He spoke, his voice the first human sound to ring through the air. He gave them a name, lion. The sound resonated with the creature's essence. Then came the elephants, gentle giants with skin like gray stone. Then the eagles descending from the heights. Then the wolves, the deer, the cattle, the creeping things. Adam named them all. His mind categorized them, understanding their habits, their strengths, their places in the ecosystem. He was the first taxonomist, the first scientist, exercising his authority over the natural world. But as the procession continued, a quiet realization began to dawn on the man. He watched the birds building nests together, calling back and forth in a language of song. He watched the lions resting in pairs in the shade. He saw the affectionate nuzzle of the horses. Everywhere he looked, he saw a binary, male and female, a reflection, a counterpart. Adam looked at his own hands again. He looked at his own reflection in the calm waters of the Pishon River. There was only one face looking back. He walked further, scanning the horizon. He checked the groves and the valleys. He felt a connection to the animals. He shared the breath of life with them. He shared the dust of the ground with them. But there was a chasm between them. When he spoke to the lion could not answer back with a concept, a dream, or a joke. When he looked into the eyes of the eagle, he saw instinct, not a soul that mirrored his own. A strange, heavy feeling settled in his chest, the first negative emotion in the history of the universe. It was not sin, it was lack, it was solitude. He realized that in this entire, teeming, vibrant world, he was utterly unique. He was a singularity. He walked through the garden as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass. The beauty of Eden was breathtaking, but without someone to share it with, the beauty felt hollow. He could point to a sunset and say, "That is magnificent," but there was no one to hear him. He sat beneath the tree of life, the great river dividing into four heads flowing past him. He felt the weight of his own existence. He was the ruler of this world, but a king without a queen is a lonely figure. He was the image of God, but God was a plurality, a unity of Father, Spirit, and Son. Adam was one, and in that oneness he felt the ache of being incomplete. The architect was watching. He saw the man sitting alone as the twilight gathered. God had said, "It is good," after the light, the land, the seas, and the stars. But now, looking at the solitary figure of the man outlined against the darkening sky, God spoke a new verdict. "It is not good that the man should be alone." Adam did not know what was coming. He only knew that the day was ending, and for the first time, he felt a heaviness that sleep might not cure. He lay down on the soft turf, the first stars beginning to twinkle through the leaves above. He closed his eyes, listening to the night sounds of the garden, the crickets, the wind, the distant river. He drifted into a deep, heavy slumber, unaware that when he woke, the world would be changed again. The sun had fully set over the garden. The twilight, painted in hues of deep violet and indigo, had given way to the velvet curtain of night. The first day of man was over, but the work of the Creator was not yet finished. Adam lay upon the soft, mossy bank of the river, his breathing rhythmic and slow. But this was no ordinary fatigue. As he lay there, a heaviness began to press down upon him, a weight far greater than simple exhaustion. The text describes it as a tardima, a deep sleep. It was a supernatural slumber, a divine anesthesia that descended from the heavens and wrapped the man in a cocoon of absolute unconsciousness. The sounds of the night, the chirping of the crickets, the distant roar of a lion, the rustling of the wind in the cedars, began to fade from his perception. His senses, so sharp and new just hours before, were gently dialed down to zero. He floated in a void of peaceful darkness, suspended by the will of God, protected from pain, unaware of the profound alteration about to take place. The garden was silent. The angels, perhaps watching from the periphery of the unseen realm, held their breath. The architect approached the sleeper. In the stillness of that primal night, the Lord God leaned over the form of the man. He did not speak. There was no thunder, no flash of light. This was a moment of intimate surgical precision. The Creator reached out. His hand, which had scooped the dust to form the man, now moved to divide him. He touched Adam's side. The skin, perfect and unblemished, yielded to the Maker's touch. God reached into the very structure of the man's being. He did not take from the head so that the woman might rule over him. He did not take from the foot so that she might be trampled by him. He reached for the rib, the bone that protects the heart, the structure that stands at the center of the body's strength. With a movement of infinite grace, God took one of the ribs. He extracted the bone, white and strong, removing a piece of the foundation he had laid just hours before. And in its place, he did not leave a wound. He closed up the flesh with a touch, sealing the side instantly. There was no scar, no blood, no trauma, only a seamless restoration. The man slept on, his chest rising and falling, unaware that he was now different. He was no longer a singularity. He had given a part of himself away to make room for another. God stepped back, holding the raw material of the new creation. But unlike the man, who was formed from the loose, shifting dust of the ground, the woman was to be built. The Hebrew word used here is bana, to build, to construct. It implies architecture. It implies structure and intricate design. God began to fashion the rib. He did not return to the dirt. He used the living bone, the substance that had already known life, already felt the pulse of a heartbeat. He wrapped the bone in sinew and muscle, weaving the delicate tapestry of a new form. He sculpted a frame that was similar to the man's, yet distinctly different. Where the man was broad and hard like the rock of the mountains, this new form was curved and graceful like the bending of the river. He formed her skeleton, lighter yet resilient. He shaped her organs, her skin, her hair. He poured the same divine artistry into her that he had poured into the universe, but refined. If Adam was the rough draft of humanity, forged from the raw earth, she was the final masterpiece, refined from the finished product. And then, just as he had done with Adam, God breathed the breath of life into her. Her eyes opened. She did not wake up to the sight of the trees or the sky. Her first vision was the face of God. She woke in the presence of her Maker, secure, loved, and fully known. She took her first breath of the cool night air, filling her lungs with the perfume of the garden. She felt the grass beneath her, the same earth that Adam slept on, but she saw the world through a different lens. She stood up. The wind caught her hair. She looked at her hands, smaller than the man's but capable of the same touch. She looked around the garden, illuminated by the soft, silver light of the moon. It was beautiful, vast, and silent. But unlike Adam, she did not have to name the animals or search the horizon to realize she was alone. She was never alone. From the first moment of her consciousness, she was with God, and she was prepared for another. God looked at her. The binary was complete. The image of God, male and female, was now fully realized on the earth. But Adam still slept. The deep sleep held him fast. He had gone to sleep alone, the only one of his kind in a universe of billions of stars. He had closed his eyes with the ache of solitude heavy in his heart. He did not know that while he lay unconscious, the answer to his silent prayer had been standing just a few feet away, fashioned from his own side. The night began to wane. The constellations wheeled overhead, marking the passage of hours. The eastern sky began to lighten, turning from black to a deep, bruised purple, then to a soft gray. The birds began their pre-dawn chorus, a low murmuring in the trees. The mist rose from the ground, swirling around the two figures, the man sleeping on the bank, and the woman standing with the Creator, waiting. The rising action of history was culminating in this moment. The stage was set for the first meeting, the first conversation, the first recognition. The solitude of the man was about to be shattered forever. God touched Adam, lifting the weight of the supernatural sleep. The heavy curtain of the Tardima began to lift. Consciousness returned to the man, slowly, like a swimmer surfacing from a deep dive. His senses reconnected. He felt the dew on his skin. He heard the waking of the world. He remembered his loneliness from the day before, a lingering shadow in his mind. He opened his eyes. The light of the new morning flooded his vision. He pushed himself up, rubbing the sleep from his face, perhaps reaching instinctively to his side, feeling a strange lightness, a new sensation. And then he looked up. Standing before him, framed by the golden light of the dawn, was the woman. She was not a vision. She was not a dream. She was solid, real, and breathing. She was standing there, brought to him by God himself.
Adam Froze.
His mind, which had categorized every beast of the field and every bird of the air, struggled to process this new reality. He looked at her, and he saw himself but different. He saw the bone of his bone. He saw the flesh of his flesh. The ache in his chest vanished instantly, replaced by a surge of recognition so powerful it nearly knocked the wind out of him. He stood up, slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence of the morning hung heavy with anticipation. The first words of poetry, the first declaration of love, were rising in his throat. The long journey of creation had reached its emotional peak. The architect stepped back, leaving the two of them in the center of the garden, the morning sun casting their long shadows together across the grass. The moment hung in the air, suspended like a drop of dew on a leaf, trembling with the weight of history about to begin. Adam stood before the woman, and for the first time since his eyes had opened to the canopy of Eden, the deep, resonant ache of solitude vanished. It was not merely a physical presence filling a void. It was a metaphysical completion. The silence that had echoed in his soul, the silence of being the only one of his kind, was replaced by a sense of profound, settling peace. It was the feeling of a key finding its lock, of a question finding its answer, of a melody finally finding its harmony. He looked at her, and he did not see a stranger. He did not see another beast of the field to be named and categorized. He saw the missing piece of his own existence. The recognition was instantaneous and spiritual. In the animal kingdom, he had seen male and female, but they were different species, different essences. Here, he saw a reflection that was accurate, yet beautifully distinct. He saw strength wrapped in grace. He saw his own nature refined. Adam opened his mouth. The silence of the garden, which had only been broken by the calls of beasts and the rustle of wind, was now broken by the first words of human poetry. The first recorded speech of mankind was not a command, nor a pragmatic question about survival, but a declaration of joy. It was a doxology of recognition. This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. His voice, deep and unused until this moment, resonated with a quiet authority that startled the birds into silence. He was identifying her. He was claiming her. Zathapam, this time at last. After the parade of the lions and the birds, after the searching of the horizon, after the crushing realization of his own singularity, this one matches. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Here, the language itself bows to the unity of the pair. Ishman Isha, woman. The words themselves are entwined. just as their natures are. In that moment, standing on the verdant grass of the garden, the first institution of human history was founded. There was no ceremony, no crowd, no written contract. There was simply the Creator presenting the gift, and the man receiving it with open arms. The text tells us they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Understand the weight of that statement. It was not merely a lack of clothing or a primitive state of undress. It was a complete absence of barriers. There was no guilt to hide, no flaw to conceal, no fear of rejection. They stood before each other and before God in total transparency. Their souls were as open as the sky above them. They could look into each other's eyes and see no judgment, no secrets, and no shadow. It was a state of innocence that the world has not known since, a perfect vulnerability that required no defense. They were clothed in light, clothed in dignity, and clothed in the acceptance of their Maker. The sun climbed higher in the sky, marking the passing of the sixth day. The two of them, the king and the queen of this new world, began their life together. Imagine them walking through the paradise that had been prepared for them. They walked by the rivers, the Pishon and the Gin, the gold of the land shimmering in the water. They touched the bark of the trees, feeling the rough textures. They tasted the fruit that hung heavy on the branches, the juice sweet and untainted. For the first time, Adam experienced the world not just as a ruler, but as a sharer. Every discovery was doubled in joy because it was witnessed by another. "Look at this flower," he might have gestured, and her eyes would see it too, validating the beauty. The isolation of the mind was broken. As the day began to wane, a golden hour settled over Eden. The shadows grew long and soft, stretching across the emerald valleys. The heat of the day dissipated into a cool, fragrant evening. The frenetic energy of creation, which had built the cosmos in 6 movements, began to settle. God looked at everything he had made. He surveyed the cosmic canvas. He looked at the stars burning in the firmament, each held in its gravitational pocket. He looked at the oceans teeming with life, the currents circulating warmth around the globe. He looked at the mountains standing as silent sentinels. And he looked at the man and the woman, standing together, completing the circuit of creation. The biological systems, the ecological balances, the spiritual connection, it all hummed in perfect unison. For 5 days, God had looked at his work and said, "It is good." But now, as the sun set on the 6th day, the architect pronounced a final, encompassing verdict. "It is very good." The work was finished. The heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. The painting was done. The brush was laid down. The chaotic void of tohu wabohu had been transformed into a structured, living, breathing cosmos. There were no loose ends. There was no chaos left to conquer. Then came the transition. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep indigos and charcoals, and the 7th day began. But this day was different. There was no command to create. There was no "let there be." There was a holy cessation. God rested. This was not the rest of exhaustion, for the Omnipotent does not grow weary. He did not need to recover his strength or catch his breath. This was the rest of satisfaction. It was the pause of an artist stepping back to enjoy the masterpiece. It was a Sabbath, a stopping. It was the establishment of minutia, a state of tranquility, serenity, and peace. Imagine the atmosphere of that first Sabbath. The universe, which had been in a state of rapid, dynamic transformation for 6 days, suddenly settled into a rhythm of peace. The energy of creation shifted to the energy of sustenance. The world was no longer becoming. It was. The tectonic plates settled. The growth of the forest slowed to a steady pace. The heartbeat of the universe stabilized. A profound silence descended upon the cosmos. Not the empty, terrifying silence of the void that existed before time, but the full, rich silence of completion. The peace of God settled over the garden like a heavy, comforting blanket. The man and the woman, resting in the safety of their home, felt the rhythm of their Maker. They entered into his rest. There was no work to be done, no fields to till, no houses to build, no striving to achieve. Only the mandate to exist, to enjoy, and to commune with the one who had made them. God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. This is crucial. The first thing God ever sanctified, the first thing he made holy, was not a place. It was not a mountain, nor a temple, nor an altar. It was a segment of time. He carved out a cathedral in time, a sanctuary made not of stones, but of hours. He set it apart as holy. The very air of the seventh day felt different, charged with a stillness that rejuvenated the soul. In this quiet climax, the universe stood complete. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the director sat in the stillness of his own glory, watching the perfect motion of his creation. The great architect had become the great sustainer. The story of the beginning had reached its end, and the story of history, of life lived in the presence of God, was about to begin. The sun has fully set on the seventh day. The first week of existence has concluded, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The great machinery of the cosmos is running silently, powered by the sustaining word of the Creator. The frenetic energy of becoming has settled into the steady rhythm of being. As we look back at this primordial narrative, a profound truth emerges from the details of the text. It is a truth about providence. It is a truth about the nature of a father. Notice the precise order of events. This was not a random collision of elements. It was a carefully staged construction project. Before the man was ever formed from the dust, the ground was already prepared to receive him. The stage was built before the actor arrived. Before Adam felt the first sensation of hunger, the trees were already heavy with fruit, their branches bowing low with sustenance. Before he felt the chill of the evening, the sun had been kindled to warm him, and the moon placed to guide him. Before he knew the ache of solitude, before he even had the language to describe loneliness, the plan for his companion was already in the mind of the Maker. The architect did not create a need without first creating the provision. He did not bring the guest into the house until the table was set, the fire was lit, and the walls were secure. Consider the air you breathe right now. In the creation narrative, the atmosphere was crafted on the second day, a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen perfectly balanced for life. But the lungs that would breathe it were not formed until the sixth day. For 4 days, the air waited. It waited for the chest that would expand with it. This is the foresight of God. He prepares the solution before the problem ever arises. He prepares the supply before the demand is ever felt. This is the God of the beginning, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who sees ahead and provides. In the vast silence of that first Sabbath, Adam and Eve lay down to sleep, surrounded by a world that was designed entirely for their thriving. They did not have to worry about the sun rising the next morning. The covenant of the day and night had been established, a promise written in the physics of the solar system. They did not have to worry about the air running out. The firmament was fixed. They could rest because the work was done by another. And so, the universe drifted into its first night of history under the watchful eye of God. The stars, young and bright, diamonds scattered on black velvet, stood guard over the sleeping couple. They formed constellations that had no names yet, burning with the clean energy of the new creation. The rivers flowed on, a ceaseless lullaby of living water, moving from the high ground of Eden to water the garden. The angels, the silent witnesses of the dawn of time, looked on with wonder. They saw a world without a scar. There was no history of war here, no memory of tears, no graves dug in the earth. The soil was innocent. The darkness was not a place of fear, but a curtain drawn for rest. There was no fear. There was no pain. There was no shadow of death. There was only life, abundant and pure. as the darkness of the night deepened, the peace of Eden deepened with it. It was a peace that passed all understanding, for it was the peace of being exactly where you were meant to be, with exactly whom you were meant to be with under the covering of the one who made it all. The anxiety of the future did not exist. The regret of the past was impossible. There was only the eternal, safe now. The story of creation is not just a story of how things began. It is a reminder of who holds it all together. The same spirit that hovered over the waters, bringing order to chaos, is the same spirit that brings peace to a restless mind. The same voice that spoke light into the darkness is the same God who watches over the sleeping world tonight. The work is finished. The rest has begun. The burden of sustaining the universe does not rest on your shoulders. It rests on His. And in that rest we find our end. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. Good night.